Hello friends, welcome back to my channel. If you are new, my name is Lauren and I am healing my chronic fatigue and adrenal fatigue by healing old emotional wounds from my childhood, specifically attachment trauma. The month I started healing my trauma was the month my body started healing, and so I am sharing my story with you and how I'm healing in hopes that I can help you heal your past to heal your body. So today I'm talking about something sort of unexpected. I'm talking about vulnerability because I accidentally evoked a vulnerability wound that I didn't even know that I had. But a few days ago, I was working on this shame idea. Last video, I made a really long video on shame because that is the wound that I'm working on healing right now. And it's this big one. I think it's really a big, kind of the core one to my big, I call it my big wound onion. There are a number of reasons for that, but a couple of them are that, well, not only all the symptoms that I have that relate to shame and all the times that I have felt profound shame in my life that, I don't know, was just such a normal occurrence that I felt like normal. It's kind of like how I've talked about fear in this channel. You just get so accustomed to feeling it all the time that it doesn't feel abnormal anymore. It just feels like your experience in the world. This is just the way I am. This is the way I am in the world. And this is just the way my life is. Anyway, shame is one of the difficult emotions that human beings feel that evokes the fear response, the sympathetic nervous system response, fight or flight. And it also comes with rage. Shame, rage, they come hand in hand. You are rage. You become full of rage because of the core shame. And core shame, you feel shame all over the place when you're interacting with the world. So I've been dealing with this shame trauma, or have just started. But a couple of days after I started working on this, I started having really intrusive thoughts about horrible things happening. And I'm so grateful for my mom in this moment, because she told me when my son was growing up that I used to have these fears, these intrusive thoughts about these fears about something terrible happening to my boy, my precious boy, and especially if I was going to go out of town or I was going to leave him with his dad for a couple days, and I would have these intrusive thoughts and be so scared that I wouldn't be there to protect him. And what my mom told me is that it's how your brain is responding when you feel vulnerable. And so a couple days after starting working on the shame wound, I was having really a ton of intrusive thoughts, and it was odd. I'm not going out of town. I thought, what is this? Why am I worrying about this? And the place that I go is, I get so scared that it's some sort of premonition, and then it gets even scarier. But so much worse. If you start believing that these thoughts could be premonitions, it's like then those things could come true, and oh my God, it's horrible. I mean, can you guys relate to this? If you have kids, it's a whole other level of vulnerability that you've never felt before. And I'm sorry, the sun is just crazy. It's right in my eyes, so I'm sorry that I have a lot of sun and shadow in this video. But all these intrusive thoughts were coming in, and I just was in these just fear-based thoughts. And so then I remember what my mom told me. She told me that is vulnerability, and I thought, okay, why am I feeling vulnerable right now? Well, what came up is because I am stirring up this shame pot. Of course that's going to make you feel vulnerable. These feelings that you have been dissociating from and armoring from and just pushing away your whole life, and then they start coming up. Yeah, you're going to feel vulnerable. But what I didn't realize is that I have pushed away feeling vulnerable. That's another emotion that I've shoved away on top of helplessness and shame. Another one that I've really blocked in my body is vulnerability. And I didn't see that because I tend to be a very emotionally vulnerable person in intimate relationships, in my close friendships and my close family members. I tend to be very emotionally vulnerable but it's because I feel safe in those relationships. So is it really vulnerability if you feel emotionally safe in those relationships? I don't know. When it comes to times when I do not feel emotionally safe, that feeling of vulnerability is one that my unconscious tries to block. So now, as I talked in the last video, there are 8 sort of difficult emotions that I'm reading about in this one book by Dr. Joan Rosenberg, 90 Seconds to a Life You Love. She identifies 8 difficult emotions that that are very common for us to block, to try to not feel. And of any of those, you run down the list and you see if you can feel viscerally what that emotion would feel like in your body. If there are some that you can't feel, you have no idea what that feels like in the body, you know how it feels cognitively, or you have an idea of what it means, but you don't know what it feels viscerally in your body, that's a sign that you have armored against it. You've pushed it away, you've blocked that energy, and you don't have necessarily a healthy relationship with that emotion. And so I had identified 2 of them, and now I have 3. So I've got helplessness, shame, and vulnerability. So now I have 3 of the 8 that I just am realizing I have blocked. I didn't realize that I didn't know what these feel like, but I didn't. So when I was feeling vulnerable, I still didn't feel it in my body. I just knew it cognitively because of what my mom said, and I was having these intrusive thoughts, fear-based thoughts. Well, then things kept triggering them in the day, and I was feeling so terrible, and I had to go somewhere that evening, and I thought, my brain fog, I was feeling so bogged down with suppressed emotions, which are symptoms of my chronic fatigue. Now that I know that, well, I was feeling really bogged down. I felt like there is stuff trying to come up and I don't know what it is, but I had this vulnerable thing in my mind. So I started havening to vulnerability, or vulnerable. And I kept saying vulnerable over and over again as I was havening. And oh my God, it did not take but a few seconds for a huge wave of emotions to come out. To be honest with you, I have not had that intense of an emotional wave in a long time. It was so intense. And I learned in that moment what vulnerability feels like in the body. Or at least my body. My head wanted to turn. I got sweaty and clammy all over. And I tend to run really cold. And I don't usually sweat a lot, but except in like my armpits when I'm crying. So I was crying, and the cry felt differently. I didn't feel pain in my chest, like in the back of my chest, where my heart is, which I do when I am crying for grief. It was the scrunching, it was in my head. There was no sharp pain like there is for grief for me. But it's such an interesting process, releasing these emotions and learning what they actually feel like in the body. I think it's interesting because I've never felt them in full before. And so when you're calming yourself with havening and you're just letting yourself vibrate from crying, it's so fascinating to think about what's happening, because it's actually, so every emotion has a vibration frequency. And so the vibration that your body is moving at when you're feeling that emotion and releasing that emotion is actually the vibration. It is, you're feeling the frequency of that emotion. And I think that's pretty cool. Science nerd, I guess. But I just think that's pretty cool. And to know that I'm okay in that moment, and that this is such a good release. This is where I've come. I've come so far, and I mean, I don't know where you are in your ability to feel these emotions, but if you're not here yet, I promise you can get there if you just keep going and you start to learn and gain confidence in your own ability to move through these emotions. Maybe you're way ahead of me and you know how to feel emotions. You've been doing it for a long time, but this is new for me, and I'm getting practiced at it. But it was kind of an exciting thing for me because it felt like a very clean, I had an emotion. I mean, I did, my unconscious was blocking it for a bit, but I evoked it with havening, and then I calmed myself with havening, and I just kept doing havening, and the emotion just kept coming up, and I had probably 4 to 5 waves of like, I don't know, 60 to 90 second waves of this emotion. And that's how emotions come up. If you were really releasing them, they'll come in 30 to 90 second waves. And then you'll get like a 30 second or 60 second pause, probably only 30 seconds, and then it'll come up again. And you keep, havening to that emotion. And it'll keep coming until your body says you're complete, until you feel complete and you don't have any more waves coming up. So it felt like very clean. I started havening, I released all this emotion, minutes and minutes, that feels, to be honest, like more than just a few minutes because it's so intense. And then it ended and I felt so much better. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is how it's supposed to feel in normal, sort of regular, everyday living when you have emotions. But even when you're healing trauma, you're healing old wounds, you're healing past trauma. This has been my goal of where to get to. Now, needless to say, I'm sure I have lots more vulnerability in there, I'm sure. But I peeled away one little piece of the onion pretty cleanly. Most of the time, it takes all of this processing and cognitive work, like days and days and days or weeks of working through something to try to try to pinpoint the emotion and figure out where it is and what's to actually evoke it. It usually takes me time to get there, and it felt good for me to be able to get to it quickly and then move it through me and then feel like it came to a resolution. I brought it to a resolution at the end. It felt really good. And that feeling of stagnation that I had beforehand was gone. And it felt really good. And so I did a video on havening. I want to encourage you because havening is so helpful. This is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. And I think it's another example of how, other emotions are going to be attached to the core emotion. So my core wound might be about mostly shame, but there's rage connected to the shame. And then there's this feeling of helplessness that came as a result of feeling trapped and unable to escape this feeling of shame as a child. And then there's powerlessness that comes with, that's, slightly nuanced difference with helplessness in my mind, and the powerlessness that comes with shame. And then you also have feelings of vulnerability. And you also might have grief come up, sadness and anger, and there might be other emotions that are connected to whatever you identify are your sort of core wounds that correlate with this illness. So I thought that was an interesting thing because, again, I didn't know that I had vulnerability as an issue point. But I do, because it makes sense that you would feel vulnerable when shame is coming up, because the emotion of shame is sort of shaming to feel. It's like you feel shame about feeling shame or having shame. It's a very strange dynamic in that way. And I just wanted to share that little story with you. I think it's really optimistic and encouraging that, after all the struggle that it's been to really access these emotions, to be able to access one and heal it. Now, that doesn't mean that that might be a fluke, might be just like the one, but for now I'm feeling good about it, and I wanted to share that experience with you because it's an encouraging message about this process, that you really do get better at the process. It's like anything else, it's a skill that we develop, and I hope that that's helpful. I hope you all have a beautiful rest of your day, and I will see you on the next video. Okay, bye.